What you're about to hear isn't just a story about growing old, it's about the day a 72-year-old woman came home from a silent retreat and found a stranger living in her house. Stay until the end because the truth behind that stranger will change everything you believe about family. The sea was still whispering when Eleanor Whitmore turned her old Subaru onto Harbor Road, the tires crunching over salt-stiff gravel. The sky above Camden was washed in that peculiar gray of late autumn, when the ocean air carried both calm and melancholy. She had just spent 6 days at the St. Mary's Retreat Center, a converted convent perched above the cliffs, learning once again how to be quiet. The silence had been good for her. The silence always was. Now, as she drove toward the white-shingled house she had lived in for 42 years, she felt something almost resembling peace. Her shoulders ached less. The tremor in her hands had steadied. She could breathe without the tightness that had settled in her chest since Thomas's death 2 winters ago. Her son Michael had insisted on this retreat. "It'll be good for you, Mom," he'd said. "You need to get out of the house." He was probably right. He often was. But Michael's version of good came wrapped in control. He'd taken to calling every day as though she were a college freshman who might forget to eat. Eleanor smiled, shaking her head. She'd survived a husband, 2 recessions, and 3 decades of New England winters. She could survive her own son's good intentions. As she turned into her driveway, something strange caught her eye. The curtains in the living room were open. She never left them open. And the porch light was on. It flickered faintly against the fog, a small warm pulse of yellow that didn't belong to her doing. Her heart quickened not with fear exactly, but with the jolt of something unfamiliar. She parked, stepped out, and stood listening. The ocean wind pressed against her coat. Somewhere in the distance a buoy bell chimed. She unlocked the door, half expecting emptiness, the familiar smell of cedar polish and faint lavender. But instead, voices. A man's baritone humming something off-key. The clink of dishes. Eleanor froze. "Hello," she called. The humming stopped. Footsteps crossed the hardwood. And then a man appeared in the doorway, gray hair, neatly combed flannel shirt tucked into corduroy pants as though he belonged there. "Ah," he said as calmly as if greeting a neighbor. "You must be Eleanor." Eleanor blinked. "Excuse me." The man wiped his hands on a dish towel. "Name's Harold Jennings. Hal, if you like. Your son said you'd be back today." For a moment, words deserted her. "My son." "Yes. Michael. He and his wife left yesterday for some trip, Aruba. I think he said he told me I could stay here while they're gone. Something about keeping an eye on the place." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Keeping an eye on my house." Hal gave an apologetic shrug. "Well, technically he said it was yours, but he sounded worried you might come home early. Guess he was right." Eleanor stared at him, trying to decide whether she was more confused or furious. Her mind raced through the possibilities, a scam dementia on her part, or most likely Michael's doing. "Why would my son think you needed to stay here?" she asked, each word clipped controlled. Hal smiled faintly as though used to skepticism. "Because Laura, his wife, is my daughter. They thought perhaps we could keep each other company." Eleanor's pulse thudded. Of course, Laura, the peacemaker, the organizer, the one who believed every problem could be solved with a casserole or a spreadsheet. "Keep each other company," Eleanor repeated, almost laughing. "I'm not a teenager in need of a chaperone, Mr. Jennings." Hal folded his arms. "Nor am I, Mrs. Whitmore. But I wasn't given much choice. They dropped me off with a suitcase and a roast chicken. That did it." Eleanor exhaled through her nose, caught between indignation and reluctant amusement. She could picture it perfectly, Laura's cheerful tyranny, Michael's anxious agreement, and this poor man caught in the crossfire. Still the intrusion stung. This house with its crooked window frames and scent of sea salt was hers. Every inch of it carried Thomas's memory, the rocking chair by the bay window, the paintbrushes still in the jar near the kitchen sink. To have a stranger standing there, towel in hand, felt like an invasion of something sacred. "Well," she said finally, composing herself, "I suppose since you're already here, we might as well establish some ground rules." Hal's eyes twinkled. "Ah, a treaty. Excellent. Shall we draw up borders, too?" Eleanor ignored the comment and stepped past him into the kitchen. It was spotless. Too spotless. Someone had rearranged the spice rack alphabetically. Her chest tightened. "Did you touch my kitchen?" He raised an eyebrow. "Only to cook. I figured we might both need dinner." The audacity of it made her laugh just once, short and sharp. She hadn't laughed like that in months. Hal smiled, sensing a crack in her armor. "See, it's not so bad having company." "I didn't invite company," she said, but her voice had softened. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The smell of roasted chicken drifted through the air, savory, warm, and irritatingly domestic. They ate in near silence that evening. The house creaked as if adjusting to its new occupants. Afterward, Eleanor poured herself tea while Hal read a newspaper he'd found in the foyer. The calm felt almost civilized. When she finally went upstairs, she paused at the landing, listening to the waves beyond the bluff. In the guest room below, she could hear Hal moving a chair scraping the floor. For reasons she couldn't explain, the sound was oddly reassuring. Still, when she lay down in bed, sleep wouldn't come. Her mind replayed every word, every look. Michael's voice echoed in her head. "You'll thank me later, Mom." Maybe she would, but not tonight. At dawn, the fog rolled in thick and silver. Eleanor woke early, pulled on her robe, and tiptoed downstairs. Hal was already in the kitchen pouring coffee. He looked up. "Morning. Do you always wake before sunrise?" she asked. He smiled. "Ex-army habit, and you?" "Insomnia," she said. They stood there for a moment, the quiet between them as fragile as the light seeping through the curtains. Then Hal held out a mug. "Truce." Eleanor hesitated, then took it. The coffee was strong, perfectly bitter. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the worst thing her son had ever done. And far out beyond the shore, the tide began to turn. The morning after Hal moved in, the fog rolled thick from Penobscot Bay, laying its fingers across the rooftops of Camden. The sea beyond Eleanor Whitmore's kitchen window looked more like a sheet of metal than water, flat gray and unwilling to give anything back. Hal was already there, of course, sitting at her table, drinking from her mug, reading her newspaper. "You're up early again," she said, her voice clipped, polite, the kind of tone New England women had perfected over a lifetime of holding themselves together. "Ex-army habit," Hal said, not looking up. "And your coffee's too strong. You trying to stay awake through the next century?" Eleanor didn't answer. She'd made it that way on purpose. She poured herself a cup, listening to the creak of the old house around them. Every sound floorboard kettle clock had once belonged to silence. Now it was filled with someone else's breathing. Hal folded the newspaper. "Looks like there's rain coming this afternoon. You ever get leaks in this place?" "No." "Good. Would be a shame if it flooded that attic of yours." Eleanor froze for a fraction of a second. "You were in the attic." Hal blinked, just checking for drafts, didn't mean to pry. She set her cup down carefully, the porcelain clicking against the counter. "You had no reason to be there." Hal raised a hand. "Easy, Whitmore. Old habit can't sit in a house without checking how it's built. Engineering brain." "Still," she said, "it's my house." "I know that." He met her eyes, finally steady and unreadable. "But your son told me to look around if I noticed anything unusual." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Michael told you that?" He nodded, returning to his coffee. "Said sometimes you forget things. Leave the stove on, misplace important papers." That was it. The match to dry wood. Eleanor felt heat rise from her chest like smoke. Forget things. She could still recall every recipe she'd ever taught her students 30 years ago. Every storm date that hit this coastline, every word Thomas had said to her before he died. "Do I look like a woman who forgets things?" Hal looked at her, and for the first time she saw hesitation in him, real uncomfortable hesitation. "No," he said softly. "You don't." The air between them thickened. Rain began to patter against the windows. By noon, the argument had settled into silence. Eleanor busied herself with polishing the silverware, an activity she hadn't done in years. She could feel Hal's presence from the next room, steady as the clock ticking above the fireplace. When she glanced toward the hallway, she saw something that made her stop. Hal standing at the base of the stairs, holding a small wooden box. It was the color of old mahogany, smooth and worn. A brass latch held it shut. "Found this in the attic," Hal said. "Thought you might want it." Eleanor's stomach turned cold. She knew that box. Thomas had kept it under the eaves since 1985, the year their first mortgage was paid off. "He'd told her never to open it, not until I'm gone for good," he'd said with that half-smile of his. She took it slowly from Hal's hands as though it might burn her. "You had no right," she said, her voice low. Hal's brow furrowed. It was half buried under some insulation. Could have been important. "It was, but not to you." He exhaled, turned toward the window. "Look, I didn't mean." "I don't care what you meant." The box was light, too light. Maybe whatever had been inside was gone. Or maybe it was never what she thought it was. Hal left her alone after that. Eleanor carried the box to the dining table, set it down beside a vase of dry chrysanthemums, and sat staring at it for the better part of an hour. Finally, she unclasped the latch. Inside lay a stack of envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon and a single Polaroid photo of Thomas standing beside a woman Eleanor didn't recognize. Her throat tightened. The letters were addressed not to her but to someone named Marjorie. She dropped them back into the box like they'd bitten her. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay. That evening, she found Hal in the living room watching the Weather Channel. His flannel shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, forearms dusted with sawdust from fixing the porch step. He looked up when she entered. "You okay?" Eleanor studied him. His calmness irritated her, the easy way he existed inside her house, as though he'd earned the right to take up space there. "Do you believe," she asked suddenly, "that people ever really know the ones they marry?" Hal tilted his head. "Not sure anyone really does." "Why?" "No reason," she lied. He didn't push. Instead, he muted the TV and said, "There's stew on the stove. I made extra." "Why are you being so helpful?" He smiled faintly. "Because when I stop fixing things, I start thinking too much." "About what?" He hesitated, then said, "My wife, and the things I didn't fix when she was still here." That silenced her. They ate in quiet, the sound of rain filling the gaps. Eleanor caught herself glancing at him more than once. The set of his shoulders, the way he stirred his stew. There was something in his stillness that unnerved her, something watchful. When the meal ended, Hal said goodnight and disappeared into the guest room. Eleanor sat alone at the table staring at the wooden box. The blue ribbon lay half untied. She thought about calling Michael but stopped herself. What would she even say? Your father might have had a secret lover, and the stranger you sent to live with me just found the proof. She rose, walked to the window. The rain had stopped. In the reflection of the glass, her own face looked strange, older, sharper, but also alive in a way it hadn't been for years. The next morning, Hal was gone. His coat was missing from the rack, his truck gone from the driveway. Eleanor's chest tightened. She told herself she didn't care, but she checked the kitchen anyway, then the porch, then the path leading down to the shore. She found him there, standing on the rocks with a cigarette in hand. "Thought you didn't smoke," she said. "I don't," he said, staring at the horizon. "Just felt like looking the part." "Of what?" "The man people don't trust." The wind whipped her hair across her face. "You think I don't trust you?" Hal laughed without humor. "I've been around long enough to know that look." She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. He turned toward her. "Whatever was in that box, it's your business. But if you need help with anything, I'm here." "Help," she echoed. "You've done enough helping Mr. Jennings." He nodded slowly, dropped the cigarette into the tide. "Suit yourself." They walked back in silence, a gulf of words between them. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a memory shifting under weight. At 2 a.m, she rose, went downstairs, and opened the box again. This time she untied the ribbon fully and pulled out the letters. The handwriting was Thomas's, but softer, more intimate than she remembered. Each one signed simply, "Yours T." Halfway through the first letter, she stopped. The words blurred. She realized what terrified her wasn't the betrayal, it was the idea that maybe she'd never truly known her husband at all. Hal didn't ask about the letters again. He just started fixing things. The leaky faucet, the stubborn back door, the loose board on the porch, one by one, small sounds of repair filled the house. It annoyed Eleanor at first, the constant rhythm of his hammer, the smell of sawdust in her kitchen. But the truth was, the noise kept her from thinking about the box upstairs. Every night she told herself she'd throw it out. Every morning she didn't. On the 4th day, while she was rearranging the bookshelf in the study, she found something she'd never noticed before, an old tape recorder hidden behind the novels. Inside it, a cassette labeled simply March 12th, Thomas. Her hand trembled as she inserted it into the player. The tape hissed, then crackled to life. "Eleanor, if you're hearing this, you're not supposed to yet." Her breath caught. "I've made mistakes. Things I can't explain without hurting you. Maybe someday when you're ready, you'll understand why I stayed silent." Then a click, silence. No ending, no explanation. She rewound it twice just to be sure. It always stopped there. When she turned, Hal was standing in the doorway, a screwdriver in hand. "You all right?" Eleanor hit stop and crossed her arms. "You seem to appear everywhere you're not invited." He shrugged. "You talk to yourself when you listen to that tape." Her cheeks flushed. "I wasn't talking. I was arguing," he said gently. I could hear it through the hall. She didn't like being seen that clearly. Hal stepped closer, the floor creaking under his boots. "Who's on the tape?" "My husband." His eyes softened. "Then that's between you and him." "Yes," she said sharply. "It is." That night she sat by the fire, the cassette on the coffee table between them. The silence was unbearable. Hal finally broke it. "You know, when Laura called me about this whole arrangement, she made it sound like some kind of senior exchange program." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. You know, you get company, I get supervision. Everybody wins." "Supervision." Her word, not mine. Eleanor let out a humorless laugh. "They're not even subtle, are they?" Hal chuckled. "No, they think they're clever, but they forget we invented clever." The line made her smile, the first real smile since Thomas's death. Then, as if struck by a sudden idea, Hal leaned forward. We could have some fun with this. Fun. They want updates, right? Let's give them updates, the kind that'll make them squirm. Eleanor stared at him. You're suggesting pretend we're romantically involved? Exactly, he said, eyes gleaming, just enough to make them nervous. She almost laughed. Almost. You're serious? Absolutely. Think of it as payback. You and me, the great parental experiment gone wrong. Eleanor wanted to say no. She wanted to call it ridiculous. But the more she thought about it, the more she wanted to see Michael's face when he read something unexpected. So she nodded. Fine, but only if I get to write the first message. The next morning, she drafted a text to her son. Hal and I are going to the harbor market today. He insists on buying oysters. Don't worry, I'll keep him out of trouble. Michael replied within seconds. Mom, please tell me you're kidding. Eleanor grinned. Round one, she said under her breath. Hal leaned over her shoulder. Nicely done. By afternoon, they'd staged a series of photos, Hal handing her flowers at the doorstep, Eleanor pouring him tea, both of them laughing at something out of frame. They weren't just faking affection, they were rehearsing control. The following day, Laura called, her voice tight. My dad just posted a picture of you two on Facebook. Is there something I should know? Eleanor replied sweetly, only that he has excellent taste in company. Hal nearly choked on his coffee from laughter. They spent the rest of the day crafting subtler scenes, each one a new move in their unspoken chess game. Every laugh, every shared glance had become part of the act. And somewhere between the jokes, something real began to hum beneath the surface, a fragile thread neither wanted to tug. That evening, as a storm gathered over the bay, Hal found her staring at the wooden box again. Thinking about him, he asked. Always, she said. Even when I don't want to. He nodded slowly. You ever think maybe you don't need answers? She looked at him sharply. Don't need answers after finding out he might have been living a double life? Hal met her anger without flinching. You think you're the only one with betrayal stories? The words hung in the air. What's that supposed to mean? He took a deep breath. My wife Marjorie, she had another man. For years. I didn't find out until after the funeral. Eleanor's voice softened. How did you know? Because he showed up. At her grave. Said he loved her too. She swallowed. And what did you do? Nothing. What's there to do when everyone's already gone? The fire crackled between them, the orange light flickering across their faces. For the first time, Eleanor didn't see him as an intruder. She saw him as another person trying to rebuild after the collapse of trust. Betrayal stories, she thought, aren't just about what people do to you. They're about what you let them leave behind. Over the next few days, the house began to feel different, warmer somehow. The kind of warmth that comes not from comfort, but from shared secrets. They still played their game, exchanging mock flirtatious messages, sending updates to their kids, pretending to be what they weren't. But beneath the surface, something shifted. Eleanor started leaving her study door open. Hal began humming while he worked. The rhythm of the house changed from avoidance to coexistence, until one afternoon she walked into the living room and froze. Hal was sitting there listening to her husband's tape. What are you doing? She snapped. He looked up, startled. It was playing when I came in. That's a lie. He stood, face darkening. You think I'd lie about that? I don't know what you'd do, she said. You seem to know more about me every day. Hal exhaled through his nose. Maybe because you keep leaving your ghosts around for company. Get out, she said. He didn't move. Eleanor. Out! Her voice cracked like glass. He left without a word. The house went silent again. The kind of silence that pressed on the skin. That night she played the tape again, waiting for a new sound, a new clue. But it was still the same. I've made mistakes. Things I can't explain. She pressed stop and whispered into the dark, then explained them now. Nothing. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger's, a woman suspended between fury and grief. Maybe that was why the next morning she found herself writing another message to Michael. Hal's gone. You got what you wanted. I hope you're happy. She stared at the words for a long time before hitting send. Then she deleted every picture they'd taken together. That evening, as the sun set over the harbor, she went to the porch and found something sitting on the steps, a small envelope sealed with blue wax. Inside was a Polaroid, the same one from the box, but this time someone had written across the bottom in Hal's handwriting. We all have our betrayal stories. Yours isn't over yet. She turned it over. On the back, a note. Meet me at the lighthouse tomorrow at noon. Bring the tape. Her pulse quickened. She didn't know if it was fear or curiosity that made her fold the picture into her pocket. All she knew was that for the first time in years she wanted to know what came next. The next morning the sea was calm, deceptively calm. Eleanor stood by the window, the cassette in her coat pocket, watching the gulls wheel above the water. Was Hal trying to help her or finish what Thomas had started? She didn't know. But she picked up her keys anyway. Some betrayal stories end quietly, she thought. Others begin when the silence finally breaks. If you felt this moment, that flicker of doubt, that quiet courage, give it a quiet like. It helps more than you think. The wind came from the east that morning, cold and steady, carrying the smell of salt and kelp. Eleanor Whitmore stood by her car at the edge of Camden's rocky shore, the cassette hidden deep in her coat pocket. The sky was heavy low, the kind of gray that turned the sea to pewter. She hadn't slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen Hal's handwriting on that Polaroid. We all have our betrayal stories. Yours isn't over yet. Now, as she stared toward the lighthouse on the cliff, she wondered what exactly he meant by ours. The walk there was slow, the path still damp from last night's rain. The tide was out, exposing long ribbons of seaweed clinging to stone. Somewhere behind her, gulls screamed the sound like laughter from a cruel child. When she reached the lighthouse, she saw him waiting near the rail hands in his coat pockets, looking smaller than she remembered. "Morning," he said. "Hal," she answered, her breath fogging in the wind. "You have a strange way of inviting people to talk." "I figured this place could handle our kind of conversation," he said, glancing toward the waves. "Nobody to overhear. Except maybe God." Eleanor stayed a few feet away. "You said bring the tape." He nodded. "Did you listen to it again?"
"Yes, and—"
"It's the same, half a confession, half a lie." Hal took a deep breath. "I can explain part of it, but you're not going to like it." Eleanor folded her arms. "Try me." He pulled a small envelope from his coat. It was yellowed, the paper fragile with age. Her husband's name, Thomas Whitmore, was written in the top corner. "I found this yesterday," Hal said. "It was in one of the floorboards I replaced under the porch. Looked too deliberate to ignore." Eleanor stared at it. "You had no right." "I know," he said, "but you deserve to know what's in it." Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. The seal broke easily. Inside was a letter in her husband's careful handwriting. March 15, 1994. "Marjorie, I've done something that can't be undone. She doesn't know, and maybe she never should. But if I disappear, you'll understand it wasn't cowardice. It was love, the kind that demanded silence." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "Marjorie," she whispered, "the name from the letters." Hal nodded slowly. "My wife's middle name was Marjorie." She looked up sharply. "Your wife?" "Yes, Marjorie Jennings. Marjorie on paper. She changed it years ago, said it sounded too old-fashioned." The air seemed to vanish between them. Eleanor took a step back. "You're telling me my husband and your wife had a past," he said, "before either of us came along." She felt the world tilt slightly. "How do you know this isn't just another cruel coincidence?" Hal reached into his coat again and pulled out a small photograph. It was the same Polaroid from the box, but now with light hitting it differently, she could see more clearly. Behind Thomas and the woman was a wooden sign half buried in snow. "Jennings Repair, 1984. Her knees nearly gave out. "No, I think he tried to end it," Hal said quietly. "But she couldn't. She carried it until the end." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. The pain wasn't sharp. It was slow, dissolving like salt water over stone. All those years of loyalty, all the dinners eaten in silence, the quiet mornings filled with routine, and beneath it a truth neither of them had spoken aloud. "You knew," she said. "You knew when you moved in." Hal shook his head. "No, I swear I didn't. Not until I found that letter." "But you suspected?" He didn't answer. She laughed bitterly. "You must have thought it poetic, two betrayed fools under the same roof." "It's not poetic," Hal said. "It's hell." The wind picked up, howling through the iron railings. Somewhere below, the waves crashed white spray, leaping high against the rocks. Eleanor turned away, clutching the letter so hard it tore at the edge. "I should hate you," she said. "Maybe you should," he answered. "I hated myself for years." She looked back at him, really looked, and saw not the intruder who'd invaded her home, but a man who'd been carrying his own ghost just as heavy as hers. "I spent years cleaning a house that never felt clean," he said softly. She used to go quiet in the middle of dinner, said she was thinking about someone she lost. I thought it was grief. Now I think it was guilt. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes hot against the cold wind. "What do we do with this, Hal?" He gave a sad smile. "We live with it, like everything else." She shook her head. "That's not living." "Then what is—" "I don't know anymore." They sat on the old stone steps leading up to the lighthouse. For a long time neither spoke. The sea kept its rhythm, endless, merciless. Finally, Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out the cassette. "If there's anything left of him here," she said, "we'll find it together." She placed it in a small battery recorder Hal had brought. The tape hissed, then played again, the same voice, the same pause. "I've made mistakes. Things I can't explain." But this time something new crackled through a faint second voice, almost drowned by static. It wasn't Thomas. It was a woman. "You promised, Tom." Then the tape snapped. They both stared at the recorder. Hal swallowed. That's her voice. Eleanor's throat closed. How do you know? Because she used to leave me notes on tapes just like that. Her voice, that softness when she was angry. I'd know it anywhere. Eleanor's hands shook so violently she had to set the recorder down. You think they made that tape together? I think they made their goodbye, Hal said. She exhaled a sound caught between sob and laugh. God, what are we supposed to do with all this? He said quietly, maybe forgive them. They were human. Were we, she asked. He smiled faintly, barely. For a while they just sat there, letting the silence settle. The wind calmed, the gray clouds thinned. A shaft of sunlight broke through and hit the water, scattering into silver. Eleanor closed her eyes. When I was young, I thought love meant choosing someone and never doubting that choice again. And now, Hal asked, now I think love is what you do after the doubt. He nodded, looking out at the sea. After the betrayal, she glanced at him. After the confession. Their eyes met, and something in both of them loosened a shared grief, finding its twin. Hal stood first, brushing the sand from his coat. I'll drive you home. No, she said softly. I'll walk. He hesitated. You sure? I need to feel the distance. Maybe it'll make sense by the time I get back. He nodded, then handed her the torn letter. Keep it. It's yours as much as mine. Eleanor walked back alone, the path winding through mist and gull cries. The air smelled of salt and memory. She didn't cry. Not yet. When she reached the edge of town, she saw the world differently, smaller maybe, but clearer. The betrayal wasn't the end of her marriage. It was just the end of the version she'd believed in. At the door, she turned one last time toward the sea. The lighthouse light blinked faintly in the distance, steady, patient, unjudging. Inside the house, everything was as she'd left it. The hammer on the counter, the mug by the sink, the faint smell of coffee and rain. She placed the torn letter beside the wooden box, then took a long breath and said to the empty room, All right, Thomas. I know now. The clock ticked. The house held its breath. She didn't know if Hal would come back, but for the first time she didn't need him to. She was finally standing on her own story, messy, flawed, and still unfinished. Outside, the sea kept breathing. Sometimes confession doesn't fix what's broken. It just lets the wound breathe long enough to heal. If this part touched you, if you've ever carried silence longer than you meant to give it a like. Quietly, like a nod that says I understand. The morning after the storm, the sea lay still, the kind of stillness that felt like exhaustion rather than peace. Eleanor Whitmore sat at her kitchen table, the letter from Thomas and the torn Polaroid side by side. The early sunlight painted the room in faint gold. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted. Just emptied. A knock came at the back door. Hal stood there, hat in hand, looking unsure. I wasn't sure if I should come, he said. You shouldn't, she replied. Then after a pause, but I'm glad you did. He exhaled, the hint of a smile crossing his face. Coffee. She nodded, motioning him in. They sat together in quiet familiarity, the way people do when the worst has already been said, and there's nothing left to lose. I went back to the lighthouse after you left, Hal said finally. Found something. He pulled a small leather-bound notebook from his coat and slid it across the table. Eleanor frowned. What's this? It was tucked inside the maintenance cabinet near the stairs, dated 1995. Your husband's handwriting. Her breath caught. She ran her fingers along the worn cover before opening it. Inside were sketches of the lighthouse, the beams, the cracked railing notes in Thomas's careful script. Salt damage replaced before winter. Marjorie said, light as memory, I'm trying to keep it burning. Eleanor's eyes filled. He worked there. Hal nodded. Looks like he helped maintain it for years. Maybe that's where it started. But it also looks like that's where he tried to make things right. She turned the pages slowly, each line a ghostly bridge between grief and understanding. Maybe that's why he built that box, she whispered. To keep everything he couldn't say. Hal leaned back, eyes on the window. Maybe we're all just trying to keep something from rusting away. They shared a fragile silence, broken only by the sound of waves against the rocks below. Later that afternoon, Hal returned with 2 toolboxes and a roll of sandpaper. What's this? Eleanor asked, meeting him at the porch. Thought we could fix the railings at the lighthouse, he said. If we're going to carry their ghosts, we might as well give them a decent view. She almost laughed. You're suggesting we play caretaker to the scene of our heartbreak. He grinned. You got a better plan. Against her better judgment, she didn't. So they went. The path to the lighthouse looked different under sunlight. Less like a wound, more like a memory healing over. Hal carried the heavier tools while Eleanor brought the notebook. Inside, the place smelled of rust and salt. Sunlight poured through the cracked windows like forgiveness. Hal set down his tools. He wrote something about this beam, he said, pointing to a note in the journal. Said it needed support. Eleanor traced the handwriting with her fingertips. Thomas always hated things falling apart. Guess we all do. For the next few hours they worked in rhythm, the scrape of metal, the echo of nails, the whisper of sandpaper against old paint. At one point Eleanor stopped to watch Hal the way his hands moved, careful but unafraid. There was something profoundly human in how he rebuilt what wasn't his to begin with. "You're good at this," she said. He looked up, spent a lifetime fixing things that didn't stay fixed. "Like marriages," he smirked. "Like hearts." She smiled despite herself. As the afternoon waned, they climbed the narrow stairs to the light chamber. The lens was clouded with dust. Hal opened the window, letting in a rush of cool air. From up there the world stretched wide, the harbor, the sleepy town, the thin line of highway disappearing into forest. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on the railing. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that our children will tell our stories the way we told our parents, filtered, simplified, missing the real parts?" "Of course," Hal said. "They'll make us villains or heroes depending on what helps them sleep." She nodded. "Maybe that's what family revenge stories really are, people rewriting what hurt them until it looks like justice." He laughed softly. "Then we're all guilty." "Maybe," she said, "but at least we're honest about it now." They found a bottle of oil in the corner cabinet and began cleaning the great glass lens. Each circle cleared a little more light. Eleanor's reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, doubled and bent. "Funny," she murmured. "We keep trying to fix what broke us, and it ends up fixing something else instead." Hal's voice came low. "Or someone." For a while they worked without talking. The sound of the ocean below became a kind of heartbeat. When the last smudge was gone, Eleanor stepped back and looked at the clean lens. Sunlight hit it just right, and for a moment the whole room filled with scattered light shimmering like rain on glass. She whispered, "It's beautiful." Hal turned the crank and the beam began to move slow, steady, alive again. They stood there bathed in its glow. Two survivors of parallel betrayal standing inside something that had outlasted them both. As evening fell, they sat outside on the rocks, sharing a thermos of coffee. The light swept over the bay in calm rhythm like breathing. "I used to think forgiveness was a gift you gave to someone else," Eleanor said. "Now I think it's just a room you build for yourself to sit in without the ghosts." Hal nodded. "Then maybe we finally built one." She smiled softly. "Together." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. For a long time they sat in silence. The gulls had gone. The water shimmered under the moon. Later that night, back at the house, Eleanor placed the repaired journal on the mantel. It didn't feel like a grave marker anymore. It felt like a bridge. Hal started the fire while she made tea. The small domestic rhythm kettle cups, the rustle of pages wrapped around them like something sacred. At one point, Hal noticed a framed photo of Eleanor and Thomas on the side table. He picked it up, looked at it for a long time, then set it back down gently. "You miss him," he said. "Always," she replied, "but maybe not in the same way." "How's that?" "I used to miss the man I thought he was. Now I miss the one he was trying to be." Hal nodded, his eyes glinting with understanding. "That's love stripped of illusion. The hardest kind." Eleanor smiled faintly. "And the only kind worth keeping." They talked until the fire burned low, about their children, their regrets, the stubborn beauty of survival. Eleanor told him about the first time she met Thomas in Boston, how he'd carried her books in the rain and promised to never let the light go out. Hal told her about Marjorie, how she'd loved music, and how he couldn't listen to old records anymore without seeing her face. The stories intertwined like threads, not competing, just existing proof that two broken pasts could coexist without erasing each other. Some families carry their revenge in silence, Eleanor thought. Others build it into something kinder, a light that keeps turning even when no one's watching. She glanced toward Hal. "You ever wonder if we're allowed to be happy again?" He chuckled. "Allowed, I think happiness doesn't need permission at our age. It just needs space." "And what do we do with that space?" "Fill it carefully," he said. "With laughter, maybe. Or something that doesn't hurt." Eleanor raised her teacup. "To that." Hal clinked his cup against hers. "To that." The fire crackled softly, and outside the lighthouse beam swept past the window once, twice, steady and sure. Sometimes rebuilding isn't about what you fix. It's about who you forgive in the process. And if you're still finding your own light, even after years of silence, remember you're not alone in your family revenge stories. We're all rewriting them one truth at a time. If that thought warms you even just a little, give this moment a quiet like. By late December, Camden had turned to glass and gold. Frost clung to the rooftops and the harbor lights shimmered against the still water. Every evening the smell of pine and cider drifted from doorways. Eleanor Whitmore stood at her window watching snow gather along the fence. The world looked suspended, as if holding its breath before the new year. Hal entered quietly, shaking the cold from his coat. "They're setting up for the festival tonight," he said. "You can hear the fiddles all the way down the bay." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I can hear them from here. Doesn't mean I'm going." He gave her that look, patient, amused, impossible to refuse. You can't keep hiding in this house forever. Come with me, just for an hour. An hour of what stranger's noise and forced cheer? He grinned. An hour of being alive. She tried to hold her ground, but something in his voice, gentle and certain, broke through the walls she'd built. Fine, she said, but I'm not dancing. Of course not, he said, pulling on his gloves. You're just coming for the cider. They walked through the narrow streets arm in arm, the way old friends do when neither wants to admit how much the other means. The town square was already glowing lanterns strung between trees, music spilling from the bandstand. Children threw snowballs near the fire pit while couples swayed to a waltz that belonged to another century. Eleanor hesitated at the edge of it all, overwhelmed by the noise and color. It had been years since she'd seen this many people gathered for joy. Hal nudged her gently. Breathe. You're allowed to enjoy it. She laughed under her breath. I forgot how. Then we'll start small, he said, leading her toward the cider stand. They sipped the hot spiced drink in silence, watching the dancers spin beneath the strings of light. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt the air fill her lungs completely. I used to love nights like this, she said quietly, before everything got complicated. Hal's eyes softened. It's still simple if you let it be. Nothing's simple, Hal. We just pretend it is so we can survive. Then pretend, he said, smiling. It's as good a place to start as any. The music changed to slow waltz. The fiddler drew out the first notes like a sigh. Hal turned to her, hand outstretched. One dance. She shook her head. I said I wasn't dancing. He didn't move his hand. It's just a walk with rhythm. Something inside her cracked a small laugh, the kind that comes from remembering what laughter feels like. She placed her hand in his. They stepped into the circle of light. The snow crunched beneath their shoes, the music soft and warm. Hal's hand rested lightly against her back, his movements easy, unhurried. Eleanor hadn't danced since Thomas's funeral reception. For years the idea of movement had felt like betrayal, but now with Hal's steady rhythm guiding her, she felt something shift. Maybe it wasn't betrayal to move again. Maybe it was grace. Around them the world blurred into motion, faces, lanterns, laughter. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting herself float for the length of a song. When the music ended, applause rippled through the square. She stepped back, breathless cheeks flushed from more than the cold. Hal bowed slightly. You did better than you promised. I said no dancing, she said, smiling, not no moving. They sat by the fire afterward, hands wrapped around paper cups of cider. The band played another tune, livelier this time. A boy ran past, his scarf trailing like a banner. Hal leaned toward her. You know, I think we've earned this a bit of joy. Earned, he nodded. After all the ghosts, all the fixing and forgiving. Yes, I'd say we've earned it. She watched the flames flicker. You make it sound like life owes us something. Maybe it does, he said, or maybe we just stopped refusing it. Eleanor smiled, turning her gaze toward the sea. In the distance, the lighthouse beam cut through the night, steady, faithful, alive again. A young woman approached, then cheeks pink from the cold. She held out a small envelope. Excuse me, ma'am. Are you Eleanor Whitmore? Eleanor blinked. Yes. This was left at the post office for you. Said it was urgent. The girl disappeared into the crowd before Eleanor could ask more. She turned the envelope over, her name written in Michael's handwriting. Her throat tightened. It's from my son. Hal said softly, open it. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. Mom, Laura, and I saw the pictures from the festival online. The town posted them. You looked happy. I don't think I've seen that in a long time. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. For treating you like someone who needed managing instead of someone who still had a life to live. If Hal's still around, tell him thank you. You both look like you found something the rest of us forgot how to keep. Love, Michael. Tears blurred the ink. She passed the letter to Hal, who read it silently before folding it back. Well, he said, voice rough, seems the kids are growing up after all. Eleanor wiped her eyes. I didn't think he'd ever understand. Maybe seeing you live was what did it, Hal said. Sometimes it takes the world watching to remind us who we are. She nodded slowly. Funny, isn't it? For all the family revenge stories that get told, all the bitterness passed down, maybe this is how it ends. Not with punishment, but with peace. Hal smiled. That's a better ending than most. Snow began to fall harder, the kind of soft, steady snow that muffled everything but laughter. A little girl nearby spun in circles, catching flakes on her tongue. Eleanor watched her, feeling something swell in her chest. Not grief this time, but gratitude. Thomas would have loved this, she said quietly. Maybe he does, Hal replied. Somewhere. She reached out and took his hand, not tentative this time, but certain. He looked at her, surprised, then smiled. Careful, Whitmore. People will talk. Let them, she said. We've given them something better to talk about. They both laughed, real laughter, the kind that rolls through the years and lands softly in the present. Later, as the crowd began to thin, they walked back toward the harbor. The snow glowed blue under the streetlights. "I can't believe you got me to dance," she said. "Wasn't that hard?" he replied. "You were halfway there already." "Halfway where? Back to yourself?" She smiled at that. Maybe so. When they reached the pier, they stopped to watch the water. The reflection of the lighthouse shimmered across the surface like a heartbeat. Hal turned to her. "You ever wonder what comes next?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "No," she said. "For once, I'm fine not knowing." He nodded content. They stood there a while longer, side by side, the beams sweeping over them, one light turning, returning, never fading. When they finally walked home, Eleanor placed Michael's letter beside the old journal on the mantel. It felt like the house itself exhaled. Hal hung his coat by the door. "You know, he said we could make the lighthouse our little project come spring. Keep it shining." Eleanor smiled. "You mean keep each other busy?" He grinned. "Something like that." They exchanged a look that said more than words could. Outside, snow drifted against the windows. Inside, the kettle began to whistle. Eleanor poured 2 cups of tea, set one in front of Hal, and said, "To new lights." He raised his cup, and to the ones that never went out. 2 days after the festival, the snow had turned to slush along Harbor Road. The holiday lights still hung from porches, but they looked tired now, the afterglow of celebration fading into real life again. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the sink drying the last of the teacups when she heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Through the window she saw a familiar car. Michael. Her hand stilled. Beside him in the passenger seat was Laura, her blonde hair tucked neatly beneath a wool hat. They looked hesitant, rehearsed the way people look when they've come to make peace on their own terms. Hal was in the living room tuning the old radio. When he saw her face, he turned it off immediately. "They're here, aren't they?" Eleanor nodded. "Of course they are." He sighed softly. "Want me to stay?" She hesitated, then said yes, "but let me speak first." He gave a small nod. "It's your house." When she opened the door, Michael smiled nervously. "Hey, Mom." Michael, Laura. Laura offered a polite, too bright smile. "We thought we'd surprise you." "You succeeded," Eleanor said, stepping aside. "Come in before you freeze." The warmth of the house swallowed them. Hal stayed seated by the fire, quiet, respectful. Michael's eyes flicked toward him, uncertain. "I didn't expect you'd still be here." Hal nodded. "I tend to finish what I start." Laura cleared her throat. "Mom, could we talk alone, maybe?" Eleanor folded her arms. "Anything you need to say, you can say here." Michael sighed. "Mom, please. This isn't an ambush. We saw the photos. The whole town did. And the letter I sent, I meant it, I did. But then I realized maybe things have gone a little fast." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Fast." Laura jumped in. "It's just people are talking. They think you and my father." She stopped herself, glancing awkwardly at Hal. "It's not that we don't want you happy, but—" "But you'd prefer I do it quietly?" Eleanor asked. Laura flushed. "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant," Eleanor replied evenly. Michael's tone softened. "Mom, you've been through a lot. Dad's gone and now this man shows up." "This man," Hal muttered under his breath, looking out the window. Eleanor turned back to her son. "Hal has a name, and he's shown me more kindness in a few weeks than you have in years." Michael's face tightened. "That's not fair." "No," she said, "but it's true." Silence. Only the crackle of the fire. Eleanor took a slow breath. "Do you know what's funny? You two talk about me like I'm fragile. But I've buried a husband, lived through 2 recessions, and survived a quiet house that echoed louder than any argument we ever had. I'm not fragile, Michael. I'm just done being managed." Laura started to speak, but Eleanor raised a hand. "I appreciate your concern, I do. But I don't need permission to be happy or to make mistakes." Michael's eyes glistened. "We weren't trying to control you, Mom. We were just scared." "So was I," she said softly, "but I did it anyway." Hal looked up, then meeting her gaze. There was pride in his eyes, not ownership, but recognition. Eleanor continued, her voice steadier now. "Do you remember when I used to tell you bedtime stories, Michael? You always wanted the ones where the hero fixed everything at the end? I hate to break it to you, but real life isn't like that. Sometimes you don't fix things, you outgrow them." Michael looked down at his hands. Eleanor crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to understand it. Just let me live it." He nodded slowly. "Okay, Mom." Laura spoke quietly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I think we both just forgot that you're still you." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Easy mistake. I forgot that myself for a while." Hal stood, then stretching. "Coffee, anyone." The tension broke just enough for a small laugh to escape from Eleanor. "Yes, please." Later that afternoon, as the car pulled away, Hal stood beside her at the window. "You handled that like a diplomat," he said. "I handled it like a woman who's been underestimated for too long," she replied. He smiled. There's that fire I like. She elbowed him gently. Careful, you'll get used to it. That evening the phone rang. It was the mayor's office. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice said, we're holding the annual Winter Memories gathering next week, stories of community and perseverance. Your son told us you've been through quite a journey. Would you consider speaking? Eleanor hesitated. I'm not sure what I'd say. Just tell the truth, the woman said. People need to hear it. After she hung up, Hal looked at her with curiosity. You're thinking about it, aren't you? She nodded slowly. I've spent my whole life keeping quiet. Maybe it's time I stop. The night of the event came cold and clear. The town hall was packed, firelight flickering against the wood-paneled walls. Neighbors, friends, even strangers filled the seats. Eleanor stood backstage, smoothing her dress, her heart thudding. Hal touched her arm gently. You'll do fine, he said. You always do. When her name was called, she stepped into the warm light. At first she couldn't speak. The silence pressed an expectant kind. Then she began. I used to think strength meant keeping everything together, your home, your family, your heart. But life has a way of prying your fingers loose. The audience leaned in. For years I believed silence was dignity, that if I stayed quiet people would think I was graceful. But silence isn't grace. It's loneliness in disguise. A murmur rippled through the crowd's soft understanding. I lost my husband 2 years ago, she continued. I found out later that he wasn't perfect. None of us are. But love isn't about perfection, it's about forgiveness. And sometimes forgiveness looks like laughter, or fixing an old lighthouse, or dancing in the snow when you swore you wouldn't. She smiled toward the back of the room where Hal sat watching, proud and still. My son once thought he had to protect me from the world. Turns out I just needed the world to remind me I was still alive. Applause rose, not loud but deep warm. When she stepped off the stage, Hal was waiting. You told them the truth, he said. I told them ours, she replied. As they walked home that night, the stars stretched across the sky like frost. The lighthouse beam swept the horizon, a slow pulse of light against the dark. Eleanor stopped halfway down the path. You know, she said, I think I've been waiting my whole life to speak like that, not to defend myself, but to be heard. Hal smiled. You were more than heard. You were seen. She looked at him then, and for the first time she didn't see the man her son distrusted, or the stranger who'd entered her home. She saw the companion who'd stood beside her through the storm. Hal, she said softly, do you ever think we meet people too late? He shook his head. No, I think we meet them when we're finally ready. She took his hand. Then I guess I'm ready. When they reached the house, the fire was still glowing from earlier. Eleanor poured 2 cups of tea and set them by the window. Outside, the beam of the lighthouse turned again, slow, steady, unwavering. She raised her cup toward it. To second chances, she said. Hal clinked his cup against hers, and to the courage it takes to take them. They sat there a long time, the quiet between them no longer heavy but full. For the first time, Eleanor felt not like a woman trying to reclaim her past, but one finally building her own present. And this time she didn't need anyone's permission to do it. The morning after the Winter Memories gathering dawned gray and soft. A thin mist hung over Camden Bay, blurring the edges of the dock and softening the lighthouse beam into a pale ribbon of light. Eleanor Whitmore woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, not the heavy, lonely quiet she once feared, but the kind that breathes. She pulled a sweater over her shoulders and went to the kitchen. Hal was already there, leaning over the stove, humming faintly as he scrambled eggs. You cook now, she teased. I adapt, he said. Figured I owed you breakfast after that speech. She poured coffee, the smell filling the room. I don't even remember half of what I said. You said what everyone needed to hear, Hal replied. Especially me. He set 2 plates on the table, simple and warm. Outside, snow began to melt in slow rivulets down the gutters. They ate mostly in silence, a comfortable one, the kind built not on words but on shared survival. After a while, Hal looked at her and said, You know I've got something to tell you. She looked up. That tone never means good news. He smiled faintly. Depends on how you look at it. My friend Nate from Vermont called. Remember him? The one who restores bridges? The one who nearly electrocuted himself with a toaster? That's the one. Anyway, he's heading a new restoration project on Lake Champlain, a covered bridge from 1872. He wants me to come help. Says they'll need someone for 3 months. Eleanor put her cup down slowly. 3 months. Maybe 4, he said. It would be good work. Quiet, honest. She forced a smile. It sounds perfect for you. Hal watched her carefully. I haven't said yes yet. Why not? He shrugged. Because for the first time in a long while, I don't want to leave something unfinished. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. I think we've done enough fixing, Hal. The lighthouse is standing, the ghosts are quiet. Maybe it's time you fix something that doesn't belong to us. Hal nodded slowly. Maybe. Or maybe it's time I stop running from the things that do. They spent the day doing small things, the kind that fill the edges of a day when bigger decisions loom. Eleanor sorted through books for donation. Hal patched a loose window frame. The radio played a station from Portland that crackled with faint folk music. By afternoon, the fog lifted, and the sky turned pale blue. Eleanor went for a walk along the harbor. The fishermen were mending nets, children skating on a frozen pond near the docks. She sat on a bench facing the sea, her breath visible in the cold air. The world looked fragile and brand new, like something just beginning again after a long pause. Footsteps crunched behind her. Hal appeared with 2 cups of coffee. "You always find me," she said. "Maybe you're not that hard to find anymore." He handed her a cup. They watched the gulls wheel above the bay. "You ever notice," he said, "how quiet this town gets after the holidays? It's like everyone exhales at once." "After the noise comes the truth," she said softly. He glanced at her. "And what's yours?" She hesitated. "My truth is, I spent too many years waiting for someone to tell me what comes next. Now I finally get to decide for myself. And I don't know if I'm ready to lose you right when I found myself." Hal looked down at his hands. "I don't want to be another thing you have to hold on to." "You're not," she said. "But maybe you're someone I don't have to let go of either." The wind blew through her hair, lifting a strand that caught the sunlight. For a moment, everything felt suspended again, a pause between one life and the next. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She walked through the house in her robe, past the fireplace, past the mantel where Thomas's journal and Michael's letter sat side by side. 2 lives, 2 forgivenesses. She lit a candle and sat at the table, writing in her own notebook for the first time in months. January 8th. The house is quiet. Hal might leave. I want to be brave enough to let him go if it's what he needs. But maybe I also want to be brave enough to ask him to stay. I used to believe love was about sacrifice. Now I think it's about permission, the kind that says you can go and I'll still be whole. You can stay and I'll still be free. When she closed the book, she felt a strange calm. Whatever happened next, she was ready. The next morning, the mail arrived with a thick envelope addressed to her. It was from the Camden Historical Society, a letter of thanks for her speech and an invitation to curate a local exhibit on ordinary courage stories of resilience. Eleanor read it twice. Her hands shook not from fear but from possibility. When Hal walked in, she handed him the letter. "They want me to help organize an exhibit." "That's wonderful," he said. "You'll do it, won't you?" "I don't know," she said. "I don't even know where to start." "Start where you always do," he said, "with the truth." She looked up at him for a long moment. "Are you still leaving?" He hesitated. "I haven't decided, but you should say yes even if I don't." The following week, Eleanor threw herself into the project. She interviewed neighbors, gathered old photographs, and recorded stories from the oldest residents in town. Each story was a fragment of survival: a fisherman who lost his boat but rebuilt by hand, a widow who turned her kitchen into a community bakery, a teacher who taught through grief and never retired. One evening, Hal joined her at the town library to help mount photos on display boards. The lamplight cast soft gold over their hands as they worked side by side. He said, "You know you should include your own story in this." "I already am," she said. "I just don't know how to title it." "How about The Woman Who Stopped Apologizing?" She laughed. "That would make a terrible plaque." "Maybe," he said, "but it's a hell of a story." Their eyes met across the table, the kind of look that carried whole conversations without a word. A week later, Hal packed his bag. The bridge project had set its start date. Eleanor helped him fold his tools and maps into neat bundles. Neither spoke much. There was too much weight in the air. When he loaded the last box into his truck, he turned to her. "If I go, I want you to promise something. Depends on what it is. Promise you won't wait for me. Just keep living. Keep building whatever you've started here." Eleanor swallowed. "And if you come back?" He smiled. "Then we'll see what's left to build." She nodded, tears gathering. "Drive safe." "I always do." He kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt like both goodbye and a promise. Then he was gone. The days that followed were strangely gentle. Eleanor worked on the exhibit, met friends for tea, walked along the harbor each morning. Her house felt different, not empty but open, like something inside had expanded instead of contracted. Michael called one afternoon. He'd seen the newspaper article about her speech and the upcoming exhibit. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. "I mean it." She smiled into the phone. "Thank you, Michael. That means more than you know." "You sound happy." "I am," she said simply. The day of the exhibit opening arrived. The gallery was filled with photos and voices, snippets of ordinary people doing extraordinary things just to keep going. At the center stood Eleanor's own display, a small table with Thomas's journal, Hal's old hammer, and a plaque that read, "Resilience isn't a grand gesture. It's a quiet decision you make every morning to stay, to forgive, to begin again." As she stood there greeting visitors, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Looks like you found a title after all." She turned. Hal, dust on his coat, a folded map sticking out of his pocket, eyes tired but bright. "You're back early," she said, heart leaping. He shrugged. "The bridge will still be there in spring. I figured this was the real thing worth building." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, then laughed through tears. "You always did have terrible timing." "Maybe the best kind," he said, taking her hand. That evening, after the crowd dispersed, they walked to the lighthouse. The snow was falling again, quiet, thick, soft as memory. Inside, the lamp still turned steadily. Hal adjusted the gear mechanism and Eleanor stood beside him. "This light's had a good run," he said. "Long as it keeps turning, the harbor knows its way home." She looked at him. "Do you think we do?" He smiled. "I think we just did." They stood in the warm halo of the lamp, watching the snow fall over the bay. Two people who had lost everything they once thought defined them and found each other in what remained. Eleanor took a deep breath. "For so long I thought peace was something that came at the end of life. Turns out it's just what happens when you stop fighting yourself." Hal nodded. "And when you let someone stand next to you in the quiet." She smiled. "Guess we finally earned ours." Winter in Camden lingered longer that year. Even as February arrived, the snow refused to melt, wrapping the town in white stillness. The bay, half frozen, glittered under the sun like broken glass. Eleanor Whitmore woke to the sound of gulls and the faint hum of the lighthouse turning. It had been 3 weeks since the exhibit, 3 weeks since Hal came back and chose to stay. The days had fallen into a gentle rhythm again. Mornings of shared coffee, afternoons filled with quiet work, Hal helping neighbors with repairs, Eleanor visiting the museum to help with a new oral history project. It wasn't romance, not in the young sense of the word. It was something steadier, two people carrying each other's silence without needing to fill it. But today was different. Today marked exactly 2 years since Thomas's death. Eleanor found Hal in the garden clearing snow off the stone path. She held something wrapped in a faded scarf, the wooden box Thomas had left behind. "I think it's time," she said. Hal looked up, understanding immediately. "You sure?" She nodded. "He's been sitting on that mantle long enough. I think he deserves the sea." Hal brushed the snow from his gloves. "Then let's take him home." The tide was low when they reached the shore. The water shimmered like steel under the winter light. A few seagulls perched on the rocks, indifferent witnesses. Eleanor knelt on the damp sand, setting the box before her. Hal stood beside her, his presence solid quiet. "I used to come here with him," she said softly, "before everything got heavy. He'd skip stones and talk about building a boat he'd never finish. I think he just liked dreaming out loud." Hal smiled faintly. "We all do that. Some dreams are better left unfinished." She opened the box. Inside were a few photographs, a pocket watch, and the torn letter she'd found at the lighthouse, the one that had once broken her heart. Now it just looked like paper. Eleanor took a deep breath and began placing each item into the sea one by one. The tide drew them away slowly, as if the ocean understood the ceremony. When she reached the letter, she hesitated. "This one hurt the most," she whispered. Hal rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then it deserves to go first." She let it go. The paper drifted for a moment before dissolving into the water. Eleanor exhaled a long, trembling breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. Hal said quietly, "You did right by him." "Maybe," she said, "but this time I did right by me." As they walked back toward the town, Eleanor noticed a familiar car parked near the pier. Michael stepped out, hands in his coat pockets. Laura followed, carrying a thermos. Eleanor smiled in surprise. "You came." Michael nodded. "You didn't think I'd miss saying goodbye to Dad, did you?" Her eyes softened. "You knew." "Hal called me," Michael said. "Said you might need company." Eleanor glanced at Hal. He looked away, pretending to admire the sky. Laura handed Eleanor the thermos, hot cocoa, the kind you used to make when we were kids. Eleanor took it, her hands warming around the cup. "Thank you." They stood there together, 4 figures against the sea. No speeches, no apologies left to make. Just presence. Michael looked out over the waves. He would have liked this, he said. He wasn't good at endings, but he loved beginnings. Eleanor smiled through tears. Then I suppose he got both. Back at the house, the afternoon sunlight slanted across the floorboards. Hal stoked the fire, while Michael and Laura sat at the kitchen table, talking about small things, the drive up Laura's garden, the twins' school. It felt almost normal. Eleanor listened from the doorway, realizing something that made her chest ache in a good way. This was what forgiveness sounded like, ordinary, unremarkable, human. When the conversation quieted, Michael looked at her. "Mom, do you ever miss it the way things were?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes. But I think what I really miss is who I thought I was back then, before I learned how strong I could be." Laura smiled gently. That's a good kind of missing. Eleanor nodded. It is. Later that evening, Michael and Laura left for their hotel. Hal poured them each a glass of sherry, and they sat by the window watching the snow drift against the glass. He said, "You know, you looked peaceful out there today." "I felt peaceful," she said, "like something finally unclenched inside me." Hal raised his glass to unclenching. She laughed softly. "You always know how to ruin a profound moment." "Just trying to keep it human," he said. The next morning, Eleanor woke early again. The storm had passed, leaving a world so white it glowed. She wrapped herself in her coat and stepped outside. The air was cold and clean, every sound amplified. Hal joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. They stood side by side on the porch looking toward the sea. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "why some people get a second chance?" He sipped his coffee. "Maybe because they finally stopped running from the first one." She smiled. "Maybe." A gull soared past, its cry cutting through the stillness. Somewhere in town, a bell rang the start of a new day. Eleanor turned to Hal. "When you came here, I thought you were an intruder. I didn't know you were going to turn my life upside down." He grinned. "That's the best kind of renovation." She laughed. "You and your metaphors." But her laughter faded into something softer. "Thank you, Hal, for staying." He met her eyes. "Thank you for letting me." That afternoon they went back to the lighthouse one last time. The snow had melted from the steps and the air smelled of salt and thawing pine. Inside, the lens turned slowly steady as ever. Eleanor ran her fingers along the brass railing, remembering all the nights she'd come here alone looking for something she couldn't name. Now she knew it wasn't Thomas she'd been looking for. It was herself. Hal adjusted one of the gears and smiled. "It's running smoother these days." "So am I," she said. They shared a quiet laugh. Eleanor stepped to the window. From up here, the world stretched endlessly, sea skylight. A pulse of life that didn't belong to any one person, but carried them all just the same. She turned to Hal. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He shrugged. "I think about breakfast, maybe fixing the fence. Beyond that, no. The future will come whether we plan for it or not." She nodded. "That's enough." As the day faded, they locked up the lighthouse and started down the hill. The sun dipped low, turning the snow golden. Halfway down the path, Eleanor stopped. "Hal," she said, "I want to show you something." She opened her coat pocket and took out her notebook, the one she'd been writing in since that night months ago when she couldn't sleep. He looked curious. "You keeping secrets from me?" "Just thoughts," she said. "But maybe they're ready to stop being secrets." She handed it to him. The pages were filled with short entries, small reflections, pieces of her healing in ink. Hal flipped through silently, then paused at one line written in uneven script. "Love isn't what saves you. It's what reminds you that you were worth saving all along." He looked up. "You wrote that?" She nodded. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's true," she replied, "and I had to live it to believe it." They reached the bottom of the hill as the first stars appeared. The lighthouse beam turned slowly above them, sweeping across the dark water like a heartbeat. Eleanor stopped to watch. "You know," she said, "I used to think endings were sad. And now I think they're just another kind of beginning." Hal smiled, slipping his hand into hers. "Then here's to beginnings." They stood there together, the sea whispering below the light, turning above steady, patient, eternal. Soft closing narration. Sometimes healing doesn't look like triumph. It looks like 2 people standing quietly at the edge of the world, watching the light they kept alive. If you've ever lost, forgiven, and begun again, you already know this story. Because it's not just about Eleanor or Hal. It's about you. About everyone who's learned that peace isn't what you find. It's what you choose every single day. La vida no siempre nos devuelve lo que perdimos, pero siempre nos da otra oportunidad para amar lo que queda. Life doesn't always give back what we lost, but it always offers another chance to love what remains. Thank you for staying through this journey, for listening, feeling, and remembering that no story of loss ever truly ends. If Eleanor's story touched something in you, subscribe to keep walking with us through more stories of love, truth, and second chances. Tell me in the comments which moment moved you most, and don't forget to like and share so others can find a light of their own, because sometimes one story can help another heart begin again.